good evening. I was just about to send greetings to an old friend. How do you do? My name is Alfred Hitchcock, and I would like to tell you about my forthcoming lecture.
Mention the name Hitchcock, and it conjures up iconic image after iconic image, moments of psychological fear captured on celluloid forever. But in all probability, the very first image that comes into your head is the celebrated profile of the self-acknowledged master of suspense. The rotund and balding figure that shuffles into view looks not unlike your favourite jovial uncle.
Flash, there was the knife, and in no time, the victim tumbled and fell with a horrible crash. I think the back broke immediately and hit the floor. It's difficult to describe the way that twisting of the
He's as recognisable as the Thames Embankment in London, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, the Royal Albert Hall in London, and Mount Rushmore in Rapid City, South Dakota, all of which he used as backdrops in his various movies. But what of the man himself? Like his films, he's somewhat of a mystery, and with all good mysteries, the clues can be found at the very beginning of the story. Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born at the home of his parents, William and Emma Jane Hitchcock, on the 13th of August, 1899. His father, William, ran a little grocery store that had been handed down to him by his own father. Alfred Hitchcock was born in the flat above it, deep in the heart of the outer London county of Essex, in the busy town of Leytonstone. Today, the house has long since been demolished, and a busy garage now stands on the hallowed ground. The town's thriving commercialism, like many of the so-called boom towns around England's capital city of London, owed much to the Great Eastern Railway line, which offered inexpensive workmen's fares into the heart of London itself. The close proximity of the River Lee, which carried canal boats stocked full of various supplies to the docks and warehouses of the Thames, also helped swell the number of jobs available. From sleepy hamlets, favoured by the landed gentry, these surrounding towns became inundated with cheap housing, schools, churches, shops, and a huge groundswell of workers and their ever-growing families. Alfred Hitchcock was the third child of the Hitchcock brood, arriving 7 years later than his sister Nellie, and a good 9 years after William and Emma's first son, William Jr. It was only in 1896 that the family had moved to Leytonstone to continue their greengrocery trade. 3 years later, as Alfred Hitchcock made the first of his famous appearances, his father took out an advert in the Express and Independent Almanac promoting his wares. Fruit, potatoes, vegetables, all of them fresh every day and all orders punctually attended to. William Hitchcock was an everyman, the sort of male character who would be typified in Hitchcock films by James Stewart, Gregory Peck, or Cary Grant. An average Joe, as it were, calmly drifting through life without making a significant ripple, until forced into a situation he doesn't want to be in. On the other hand, William's wife, Emma Jane, was a stern and aloof mother to Alfred, rigid to the core, with a Catholicism that rooted her family in a strict and serious religion. It's perhaps this view of women that tainted Alfred Hitchcock's perception of the female characters in his films, leading him to use actresses of a similar look and personality. Grace Kelly, Ingrid Bergman and Tippi Hedren were all beautiful, unattainable women who appeared cold and detached, hiding their sexuality behind a mask of intellect and repression. Hitchcock's early years are shrouded in mystery, but it would appear that his childhood was a happy one. One memory, recounted by Hitchcock to anyone who would listen, was of the time his father sent him to the local police station with a note. The note stated that he was to be locked in a cell for 5 minutes to show him what happened to little boys who did wrong. It was either a valuable life lesson that his father was trying to bestow, or an elaborate practical joke, as his grandfather was a policeman and would no doubt have had friends in the close-knit constabulary. Either way, the slamming shut of the cell door was a memory that Hitchcock would never forget. In fact, he used it to end a couple of his later movies. The Great Eastern Railway Line was the start of a fascination for the young Hitchcock with trains and, subsequently, all forms of transportation. A love of all things connected with railways is a peculiar obsession of the English, and Hitchcock shared it to the hilt. He'd use it to good effect in most of his movies, engineering romance, danger and death on train, car, boat and plane rides. In 1906, the Hitchcock family moved down the River Lee to take over the running of 2 existing stores in Limehouse in the borough of Stepney. William Hitchcock had grown tired of greengrocery and took up a new career as a fishmonger. One of his shops sold fresh fish, and the other one supplied a staple diet of England's favourite food, fish and chips. Salmon Lane, a very appropriate road name to play host to a fishmonger, was a cosmopolitan place where Cockney life would intermingle with a massive influx of immigrants, ranging from the Irish to the Jews, with a Chinese and communist quarter thrown in. Hitchcock became addicted to the hustle and bustle of the Kaleidoscope community, taking every available opportunity to explore by tram or by tube train. It's very appropriate that the town of his birth has commemorated Hitchcock by a series of wonderful mosaics depicting scenes from his films in the underground tube station at Leytonstone. He, in point of fact, knew the entire layout of the routes that these transports took by the time he was 8, going so far as to memorise the New York Transit Map too, years before he even set foot on American soil. Hitchcock was, as he appeared to be in later life, a voyeur. He enjoyed watching what was happening around him rather than being part of it. Perhaps this is why he took to travelling on trams and trains so much, observing his fellow travellers. This could also explain why he found refuge in West End theatres and movie houses, entranced by the dramatic and cinematic form that transported him away from his lonely, if contented childhood. This outsider status was evident in his early days of schoolings, when he sat out of physical games and was shunned by the other boys for smelling of fish, simply because of his father's profession. His education was bound up, like his family upbringing, in religion, and by the time he was 11 years old, Hitchcock was enrolled at St. Ignatius College in Stamford. Founded in 1894, this was a Jesuit-run day school for young gentlemen, and Hitchcock would take the train from Limehouse every morning to get there for Mass at 8:45 a.m. As well as being a school, With a wide and varied curriculum of learning, St Ignatius College was also a thriving parish community too, with garden fetes, holy days, holiday concerts and family socials. But as his family attended Mass in Stratford, where his uncle presided as Father John, Hitchcock felt left out and isolated from this community spirit at the college. Again, his outsider status made him an active watcher rather than an active participant, perhaps pointing his way to his career as a director, always watching from the outside of the action. Jesuit learning was very strict in its punishments, and resulted in Hitchcock saying he left there with a strong sense of fear from the harsh punishment regime meted out by the priests, a sense of how to be realistic, even paradoxically going so far as to teach methods that when taken to their zenith could disprove the existence of God, and Jesuit reasoning power, the power of arguing a point even when it was implausible. This certainly laid the seeds for his working career, as his films attest to all of these things: the sense of fear, the realistic but implausible, and the radical reasoning behind them.
I chose to be what I am.
Hitchcock left school at 14 and applied himself to night classes in engineering with half-hearted ambitions to be an aviation navigator, his love of transport overtaking any idea of what he actually wanted to do as a career. In 1914, as the First World War broke out and Hitchcock's dreams of being a navigator evaporated, he was hired by W.T. Henley's Telegraph Works, a leading manufacturer and installer of electrical cables in the District of London, which is today better known as the Barbican. It wasn't exactly flying, but it was working off and above the ground. It was during the early stages of his new job that his older brother, William Jr., paid Hitchcock a visit. He told young Alfred that their father had passed away, and then ushered him on to commiserate with his sister Nellie, who was working nearby as a department store model. William Hitchcock was 52 years old, but a lifetime of heavy social drinking had taken its toll, and the charismatic everyman who Hitchcock looked up to was no longer there to be a cheerful mentor. As World War I raged on, an old way of life was passing, and times were definitely changing. Hitchcock's elder brother took over the running of the family business, which left young Alfred free to continue with his more technical occupation. By the time he was 18, Hitchcock was eager to join in the fight for Great Britain's survival, but was turned down after a medical examination declared him overweight with a glandular condition, and still disturbed by his father's death. Living through the First World War in London rather than at the front line would have subjected Hitchcock to all manner of conflicting experiences on a daily basis. It was perhaps this paradox, coupled with his father's early death, that would mark the end of Alfred's carefree youth and make him begin to see all tragedies in a blackly comedic light. There are some who would suggest this to be an early twist in Hitchcock's personality. However, it was far more likely to be a straightforward defence mechanism for a young man facing the harsh realities of his time. Working at W.T. Henley's, Hitchcock found a camaraderie that had been lacking in his life up until then. It enabled him to become less of a loner among men and more of a leader of men. Progressing through the ranks, he moved away from engineering to end up in the sales section of the company. During this time, he enrolled at Goldsmiths College, a branch of the London University, to study the history and principles of art, thinking it might help him continue upwards in his job. It paid off very quickly when he was drafted into the advertising division, with a picture-orientated job of creating advertisements for the company brochures. A bizarre episode in Hitchcock's life began when he took dancing lessons with other employees of Henley's at Cripplegate Institute, which was situated on Golden Lane, nearby the Henley offices. The dance lessons were presided over by William Graydon, whose acquaintance had a marked effect on Hitchcock's thinking when it came to future filmmaking. In fact, the Graydons lived very near the Hitchcocks in Leytonstone, both families knowing each other through being staunch Catholics, and both with a keen interest in the theatre. Hitchcock's sister, Nellie, was on friendly terms with Avis Graydon, the younger daughter of the family throughout their lives. The Graydons' eldest daughter was married and took amateur theatre classes in London, which Hitchcock may very well have attended. Her name was Edith Thompson. In 1923, Edith's lover, Frederick Bywaters, was found guilty of killing Edith's husband. Edith was also sentenced to death, being found guilty of inciting the dastardly deed. It was a controversial crime, trial and verdict, dominating the headlines throughout the 1920s. Hitchcock, who often hinted of a friendship with Edith, may have been influenced by the Whole Day Book. Many believed Edith was falsely convicted, and there is a theme running through Hitchcock's movies of false conviction and the wronged woman. The Henley Company set up a popular in-house magazine called The Henley Telegraph, which Hitchcock not only edited, but also heavily contributed to, with many darkly humorous and fantastical tales. These early flights of fancy by Hitchcock are heavily influenced by his love of authors he admired, such as Edgar Allan Poe, G.K. Chesterton, and John Buchan, the latter being instrumental in Hitchcock's career. In fact, the Henley Telegraph was so successful that it was sold outside of the company offices too. Despite his success at Henley, Hitchcock made no secret of the fact that he'd love to get into the British film industry. He devoured trade journals and magazines, hung around film sets in London, and generally became the outsider again for a while. In 1921, he read an advert for the opening of the English production branch of Paramount Pictures called British Famous Players Lasky. One of the jobs on offer was that of a captioneer, the writers and illustrators of the explanatory titles between scenes that gave a voice to silent films. He made a set of these cards and continued turning up with his portfolio until they offered him a job, impressed with his demonstrative persistence. It was a coming of age at 21 that set Hitchcock on his way to become the most famous of all film directors. British film Players Lasky didn't last very long in England, and when it was winding down its productions, Hitchcock took the chance to try his hand at art direction, script writing, and film direction. During this time, he met the woman that he was to spend the rest of his life with. Her name was Alma Reville, and she was an accomplished film editor. Alma was born just a day later than Hitchcock, on August the 14th, 1899. She hailed from Nottingham, famous for the lace industry at the time. Her father was a lace representative in London, and she joined him on trips to the capital, landing a job as a film cutter at the London Film Company through a friend of the family. In 1923, the time of Edith Thompson's trial and hanging, a new British film company had been set up by Michael Balcon, Victor Saville and John Friedman. Michael Balcon became the most well-known and influential British producer of all time, being a master businessman with amazing powers of salesmanship. It was he who struck a deal, rare in the struggling British film industry, to allow their films to gain an American distribution deal through the Select organisation. This was a company run by Louis Selznick, a man more famous for being the father of two high-flying sons, both of whom were a great help to Hitchcock in his career. David, the younger Selznick, would become a very famous producer who would give Hitchcock his first contract in America, and the older brother, Myron, would eventually become Hitchcock's first agent in Hollywood. The Balcon Saville Friedman Film Company took over the Islington Studios, where British famous Players Lasky had been based, and in doing so also took on some of their remaining employees. Hitchcock was one of these remaining employees, after many had been laid off in a cost-cutting exercise, and was delighted when Michael Balcon offered him the chance to be an assistant director on their first motion picture, Woman to Woman. When asked if he knew any good scriptwriters or art directors, he nominated himself for both extra jobs. With the extra responsibility came more control, and he was able to start seeing things done the way he wanted them to be realised. He hired a new film editor, and who better to choose than Alma Reville, the girl who'd never been out of his mind since he'd first set eyes on her. She'd been one of the casualties of British famous Players Lasky's cost-cutting purge, and Alma was astonished that Hitchcock remembered her. Woman to Woman showcased an American star called Betty Compson, who became another seed planted in Hitchcock's fertile mind. When he found something he liked, he tended to stick with it, often growing, cross-cultivating or pruning, but always tending to the same root idea. This was the first appearance of the composite Hitchcock leading lady, blonde, beautiful and aloof. Woman to Woman gave Hitchcock a taste of what he yearned for, the power to control the film from the script, through the look of the film, and to the direction it would take. It also gave him his first real taste of success. It was the first British film to premiere in New York, scoring a commercial success in the USA, critical acclaim in Great Britain, and even a box office triumph in Germany, where it had the distinction of being the first British film shown profitably since the war. Unfortunately, the next two films were critical and commercial disasters, which sent the Balcon Saville Friedman Company into receivership. However, Michael Balcon jumped ship first and founded Gainsborough Productions, named after Thomas Gainsborough, the 18th century English painter. The Gainsborough lady that appeared at the start of every one of these films, dressed in 18th century apparel and smiling beautifully under a magnificent feathered hat, would become a recognised stamp for the British film industry. A trademark that signified good taste, refined entertainment and dignified quality. The first Gainsborough production was The Passionate Adventure, again using Hitchcock as co-director, art director and scriptwriter. It's a gripping tale that set the template for Hitchcock's catalogue of films, as it contains a murder, an endangered woman in distress, a wronged man, and an end scene that builds to a violent crescendo. It's also very stylistic, using stark images and famous landmarks to set the scene of the story. Alma Reville was constantly at Hitchcock's side during his time at Gainsborough Productions, ever the faithful muse. He looked to her for approval whenever he'd finished directing a shot or sketching out a storyboard for a new sequence to film. Their relationship was cemented during frequent promotional and professional visits to Berlin in Germany, where they spent most of their time trying to cover for another Gainsborough director, Graham Cutts, who was conducting several extramarital affairs and engaging in all the seedy nightlife Berlin had to offer. It was here that Hitchcock had his eyes opened to all manner of sexual practices, again being the watcher rather than the participant. Because of his Catholic upbringing, with its strict taboos on sinful endeavours, he was fascinated by what was forbidden to him. The film that really elevated Hitchcock to a place where the critics and public knew who he was, rather than just knowing the stars of his films, was called The Lodger. It was a film based on a best-selling novel, which itself was based on the famed Jack the Ripper killings. Jack the Ripper was the name given to a mysterious serial killer who stalked the alleyways of London during 1888, killing and disemboweling prostitutes. Because nobody was caught and tried for these murders, the mystery of Jack the Ripper is shrouded in conspiracy theories and entertaining flights of fancy. Was it just one man, or a series of copycat murders? Was it a respected surgeon because of the medical way the mutilations of the victims were carried out? Was it a high-powered member of the royal family, using his influence as a cover for his violent tendencies? All of these questions have plausible answers, but none of them can reveal the truth. This was the sort of mystery that intrigued Hitchcock, and the resulting film was one in which he was able to attribute every one of his famous trademarks. In The Lodger, the women who are being murdered are all blonde-haired, a notion that wasn't in the original book, and the handsome man you believe to be the gruesome killer turns out to be wronged. This is only discovered at the denouement when another murder is conducted whilst he's about to be lynched by an outraged mob. This is another variation from the book, where the lodger turns out not only to be the killer, but also fades away into the fog-bound London night in exactly the same way as Jack the Ripper did, never to be seen again. The Lodger was a resounding success, both in the eyes of the critics and the wallets of the public. Off the back of the film's unprecedented box office and critical praise, Alfred Hitchcock and Alma Reville became man and wife, exchanging vows on December 2nd, 1926. Their honeymoon route was an annual pilgrimage every Christmas for most of their lives, taking in Paris, Lake Como, and St. Moritz. On July 7th, 1928, Alma gave birth to the Hitchcock's only child here at Cromwell Road in London. Hitchcock, normally never happier than when Alma was at his side, uncharacteristically panicked and fled the home birth as the labour progressed, only returning when the baby girl had been born, clutching an exquisite bracelet he'd bought as a peace offering from a jewellery store in Bond Street, London. The baby was christened Patricia Alma Hitchcock and was a welcome addition to the close relationship of Alfred and Alma. It was also the year that Hitchcock directed his first talkie, as the age of the silent film was coming to a close. Hitchcock admitted, later in life, that he always regretted the coming of sound to movies. He said that the poetry of the medium suffered as a result, with too many subsequent movies composed of pictures of people talking rather than pictures of an unfolding story. Even though he disliked the medium, the resulting collection of Hitchcock's final British movies, with the added element of sound, were all genuine classics. The Man Who Knew Too Much, The 39 Steps, Secret Agent, Sabotage, The Lady Vanishes, and Jamaica Inn. Because of these successes, Hitchcock's American agent, Myron Selznick, tried to get his brother David O. Selznick to supply a contract for Hitchcock to work in American pictures. David was notoriously difficult and offered a deal that was well below what Hitchcock needed to be paid, accounting for British taxes and American surcharges. However, excited by the prospect of working in Hollywood, Hitchcock paid his own way overseas to attend contract negotiations, with his wife Alma constantly at his side. He finally signed in 1939 on the basis that he'd be directing a film called Titanic. This appealed to Hitchcock, as it was another story he could make that revolved around a journey. Everyone knows what happened to the huge passenger cruise ship Titanic on her fateful maiden voyage in April 1912, when it struck an iceberg and slowly sank, losing most of its passengers to the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. It would be the story leading up to it that fascinated Hitchcock, where he again had a suspenseful, bold ending that would climax his love story on the run. Mr. and Mrs. Hitchcock and their young daughter Patricia left the shores of England on March the 4th, 1939, sailing across the sea to the land of opportunity. As they left England behind, the clouds of a Second World War were looming large over their native shore. America was not only a huge step for Hitchcock and his family to make, but it was also a safe place to be when war finally broke out again. At the age of 40, halfway through his life, he'd become the outsider again. An alien on distant shores, with no group of close-knit comrades to surround himself with, and only his beloved Alma to tell him he was doing the right thing. When Hitchcock began his Hollywood career, it closely linked in with the end of his British Film Industry Association. Jamaica Inn had been an adaptation of a Daphne du Maurier story, and for his first American production, he'd be adapting another story by the same writer. This one was called Rebecca, and it began filming 5 days after the fateful moment that began World War II, when Adolf Hitler's German army invaded Poland. Rebecca was a difficult shoot, as his producer, David O. Selznick, felt that he should have final veto on everything that was done. Hitchcock considered this somewhat of a straitjacket, and was fortunate that most of his producer's time was taken up by extensive post-production on the epic and overblown Gone with the Wind. Rebecca won an Academy Award for its producer, taking home the Best Picture Oscar against such classic competition as The Philadelphia Story, Our Town, The Great Dictator, Kitty Foyle, and The Grapes of Wrath. He lost out on the Best Director award to John Ford, again feeling his outsider status. His next film, with the same blonde female star, Joan Fontaine, was Suspicion, which also starred Cary Grant in his first role that subverted his nice guy image to portray the darker side of his character. And it won Fontaine an Oscar for Best Actress. In the space of 2 years, Hitchcock's films had won 2 Academy Awards. But, like Cary Grant, his English-born fellow countryman and favourite male lead, Hitchcock never won a competitive Oscar during his career, even though he was nominated several times. Whilst the Second World War raged in Europe, the English press took to firing pot shots at the British contingent in Hollywood. Hitchcock was singled out for some vicious criticism from his old employer and friend, Michael Balcon. Again, like Cary Grant and many other English stars, he was doing his war work in secret, and the criticism so incensed his wife Alma that she'd never return to England again, relocating her side of the family to the USA. She also obtained American citizenship at the end of the war in 1945, a full decade before her husband did. In September 1942, Emma Jane Hitchcock, Alfred's mother, passed away at the age of 79. It was during the making of another Hitchcock classic, The Shadow of Doubt, which was scripted by America's eminent playwright Thornton Wilder. In the film, the mother of the main character is called Emma, and is certainly a scripted homage to Hitchcock's mother, bearing the stern, upright qualities that she was steeped in due to her Catholicism, and yet showing her caring, complex nature towards her son. The following year, Hitchcock was dealt another personal blow, as his elder brother, William Jr., died in much the same way as his namesake of a father, through years of heavy drinking and at roughly the same age. Concerned about his own health, these family deaths prompted Hitchcock to go on a rapid diet and lose over 100 pounds in weight. Ever the practical joker and clown, he managed to include his customary cameo in the film he was shooting called Lifeboat, by way of a newspaper advert for Reduco Obesity Slayer Corset, showing him in his before and after profile. Alfred Hitchcock's cameo roles are very interesting, and as his career progressed, audiences would get as much satisfaction from spotting the director as they would from working out whodunit. Another death in 1944, this time of his agent Myron Selznick, and again through heavy drinking, freed him from the tyrannical constraints of David Selznick's contract at Selznick International, and allowed Hitchcock to become his own free agent and finally attempt some financial security for himself and his family. He made 3 more films to see out his contract, 2 of them generally regarded as masterpieces, Spellbound and Notorious, and then formed Transatlantic Pictures in an attempt to collaborate with the very best of English and American talent. Sadly, his ideals were compromised when the company went bust after 2 experimental pictures, Rope, a stage play that was filmed in sequence and in continuous long takes of 10 minutes, and Under Capricorn. The latter of the two films was banned by many Catholic organisations in America because of the revelation that Ingrid Bergman, the star of the film, had been conducting an extramarital affair with Roberto Rossellini during the filming. Hitchcock was definitely not amused with one of his favourite leading ladies. Rope had been offered to Cary Grant and Montgomery Clift, but because of the noted thread of homosexuality in the script, they each in turn got cold feet and declined, perhaps because both men had been targeted by the media on various occasions for their close relationships with male friends.
Hello, Ronnie. What do you have?
Dry martini, please. Haven't those girls arrived yet?
Not yet. Who cares? Come on, let's sit down over here. Look, Ronnie, I got your note, but I'm blowed if I'll lend you £1,000.
Oh, never mind about that. I shouldn't have asked you, really, but you know how broke I am, and you're rolling.
No, it's not a question of whether or not I can afford it. The point is, it's too easy to lose one's friends that way.
No, well, let's forget it, shall we? I shouldn't like anything to spoil our friendship.
Oh, don't let's talk about money anyway, Ronnie. I'm an ill man.
Oh,
Oh, no, I'm not kidding. It's on the level. There's something wrong with me.
Oh, well, if you're really feeling ill, why don't you let Sir James Allroyd have a look at you?
Who?
Sir James Allroyd. He's a bit of a crank, and he'll charge you 20 guineas. He's the best diagnostician there is.
Oh, no. He's what?
Don't ask me to repeat that. Anyway, he'll tell you what's the matter with you.
In the end, Hitchcock began his association with James Stewart, a classic American everyman figure who would work on as many Hitchcock films as Cary Grant did. After James Stewart had returned from active and decorated service in World War II, he wasn't sure that acting was exactly a man's job, and sought out meatier and more complex roles. Rope was the first of a long line of twisted everyman figures that contrasted with his original folksy image. Whilst Alfred Hitchcock was making these two films, his wife was revelling in her usual role as scriptwriter and had been spending huge amounts of time with their mutual friend, Whitfield Cook. According to Cook's private journals, their closeness developed and they began having intimate relations. Whether or not Hitchcock knew about this is open to debate. He long touted himself as impotent and stressed that his daughter Patricia was the result of his one and only foray into the world of Catholic sin. Both the scripts Alma Hitchcock worked on with Whitfield Cook during their time together concerned a woman torn between two lovers. Perhaps she was inadvertently trying to tell her husband something, or perhaps it was just coincidence. The critical reaction to Under Capricorn, a script she championed highly, was so severe that Alma never had a script credit again, preferring to just act as Hitchcock's muse and confidant. The affair with Cook petered out after the filming was completed for Strangers on a Train, a film in which Hitchcock's daughter Patricia was cast.
Two fellows meet, like you and I. No connection between them whatsoever. Each one has somebody that he'd like to get rid of. So, they swap murders.
Fantastic, isn't it? You didn't know when Bruno proposed this pact that he was serious. Dead serious. You had made the mistake of speaking to a stranger on a train. And now, wherever you go, whatever you do, you find yourself dominated by his evil presence. And you, Bruno, to you, killing was the answer. Murder without clue, without motive. The perfect crime. Too perfect. And Anne, life looked very attractive to you, until the love in your heart became gripped by a terror that drew you deeper and deeper into this vortex of conspiracy.
In 1954, Hitchcock signed an extraordinary contract with Paramount Pictures just before production on Rear Window began, which allowed him complete creative control. He also retained the ownership of all of his movies after an 8-year period. The Hitchcocks weren't extravagant with their money, so the deal was never about finances. It was about the ability to create a pure body of work without interference. Their only expensive habit was cultivating a small collection of art by famous post-impressionist and fantasist artists. Hitchcock's particular favourite was the Swiss painter Paul Klee, who he often compared himself to in his work. Walter Sickert was an artist who Hitchcock had many drawings by, well known for his depictions of low-life subjects. It's interesting to note that in a recent study of Jack the Ripper by American crime writer Patricia Cornwell, Walter Sickert is allegedly proved to have led a double life as the infamous serial killer. This would no doubt have amused Hitchcock greatly. Rear Window was the ultimate voyeur film, centred on an invalided photographer who has nothing better to do with his recuperation time than watch the occupants of the building opposite him. Hitchcock may have been parodying his own films in making this. He may have been parodying himself. But the joke never confused the viewing public, who instantly hailed it as the definitive Hitchcock film to date.
A news photographer whose beat used to be the world. Right now, his world has shrunk down to the size of this window. He's been watching the people across the way. Nobody seems to pull their blinds during a hot spell like this. He knows a lot about them by now. Too much, perhaps. For instance, down there on the second floor, the woman pacing about. He calls her Miss Lonely Hearts. So lonely that even death seems like a friend. These are the newlyweds on a honeymoon no one will ever forget. He calls her Miss Hearing Aid, an artist of a very odd and strange art. The songwriter who plays the same melody over and over again. A genius or insane? This is the traveling salesman and his invalid wife. Out of their arguments and nagging comes a weird kind of love. Miss Torso, the body beautiful. That is, viewed from a safe distance.
Those are just a few of my neighbors. First, I watched them just to kill time, but then I couldn't take my eyes off them, just as you won't be able to.
And you won't be able to take your eyes off the glowing beauty of Grace Kelly, who shares the heart and curiosity of James Stewart in this story of a romance shadowed by the terror of a horrifying secret.
The Master of Suspense, as he'd been dubbed in the press, began his Paramount years as totally paramount to the company's finances. Not one of his films lost money for the studio, and he produced such classics as To Catch a Thief, The Trouble with Harry, Psycho, Marnie, The Birds, the remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much, The Wrong Man, Vertigo, and the celebrated Hitchcock favourite, North by Northwest. In 1955, he also began to host Alfred Hitchcock Presents, a TV show for CBS, which was such a massive success that it ran for the next 10 years. But due to this and his line in marketing books with the Alfred Hitchcock title, he was becoming a public figure rather than a respected director. He would forever onwards be dubbed the Master of Suspense, and found it difficult to shift away from retreads of what he'd already achieved. After Grace Kelly, his two-time leading lady and perfect Hitchcock blonde, married Prince Rainier of Monaco and went into enforced cinematic retirement, Hitchcock tried to find someone he could mould into his ideal icy blonde temptress, much like James Stewart's character does in Vertigo. He'd used Doris Day in The Man Who Knew Too Much, Eva Maria Saint in North by Northwest, Kim Novak in Vertigo, and Janet Leigh in Psycho. However, it was after spotting an unknown actress in a commercial that he actively tried to find out who she was, so she could screen test for his film, The Birds. She was called Natalie Hedren, known by her Swedish nickname Tippi, which meant little girl. Tippi Hedren had just moved to California to try acting after being a model, and was the divorced mother of a 4-year-old child called Melanie, who would grow up to become the famous movie actress Melanie Griffiths. He worked with her for 2 pictures, teaching, coaxing and encouraging her until, she insists, he made improper advances to her on the set of Marnie, and their relationship dissolved in acrimony. A few such claims have been made by other actresses, detailing Hitchcock's clumsy attempts at flirting as his way of getting them into character. But it does appear that he was a man of impulse and rude humour, who tested the boundaries of taste because of what he was denied by his self-acknowledged impotence and the Catholic upbringing of guilt and fear. It was rare that he fell out with any of his actresses, even the ones who suggested that Hitchcock had behaved improperly. But Tippi Hedren was the only one who never worked or socialised with Hitchcock again.
Has she just realized that she forgot her umbrella?
The colors. Stop the colors!
What colors?
Marnie's trouble goes deeper than that. Far deeper. And this is the problem which Mark must probe. But first, something must be done to calm this girl. Our hero applies mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. But that may give you the impression this picture is all sex and no mystery. Not so at all. Here, for example, Marnie is speaking to, I'm not sure who actually, but he is a man from her past, a past she seems to be denying. Oh dear, they're at it again. Let me assure you that this is all in the spirit of investigation. And this, here is further proof that Marnie is a talking picture.
You don't love me. I'm just something you've caught. You think I'm some kind of animal you've trapped.
That's right, you are. And I've caught something really wild this time, haven't I? I've tracked you and caught you, and by God, I'm going to keep you.
That should be quite enough. If you wish to hear more, you will have to buy a ticket. As for which one of them is the wild animal, there are times when I'm not sure. I don't think that was necessary. Actually, I think I should withhold comment, since I'm not certain I understand this scene. I shall leave the explanation to your own vivid imagination. It would appear that Mark has a single solution for all problems. This is not so. Mark is a complex man, dark and forbidding. He can also be kind and considerate. And he is also a troubled man. Troubled because he cannot seem to unravel the mystery of the girl called Marnie.
During the lucrative and creative years at Paramount Pictures, Hitchcock sensed a feeling of his own mortality as health problems began to beset him and his wife Alma. He spent 4 months in hospital with hernia and gallbladder operations, while she contracted cervical cancer and was cured due to a revolutionary new radiation treatment. He was also surrounded by the passing of friends and colleagues, and it made him feel anxious about his health. Coupled with chronic drinking, a hereditary vice, and overeating, Hitchcock had a heart attack and a pacemaker installed in 1974, a few years after Alma had suffered a major stroke, which left her paralysed in one hand and with a weak heart too. His last 4 films were a struggle, and all contained more violence, sadism, nudity, and, oddly, more humour than before. Torn Curtain, Topaz, Frenzy, and Family Plot were his last commitments to celluloid, with only Frenzy standing out as a genuine classic by again borrowing its initial plot from the Jack the Ripper murder cases, which so intrigued Hitchcock throughout his long life. Shortly after the release of his 53rd film, Family Plot, Alma suffered another stroke, the severity of which totally crippled her and left her confined to their house with a permanent nursing staff. Hitchcock continued to work on script ideas and tried to develop his 54th film at his offices on the Paramount Studios lot. At a tribute dinner in Hitchcock's honour in 1979, organised by the American Film Institute, he greeted old friends like Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman as if it would be the last time he'd see them. His sister, Nellie, died in the same year, and Hitchcock all but gave up living. But he did accept Queen Elizabeth's invitation to make him an honorary Knight Commander of the Order of the British Empire. Becoming Sir Alfred Hitchcock filled him with pride, and the ceremony took place in America as the director was advised against travelling by his doctor. And then he finally shut up his office and went home to direct his own death scene. Lying motionless in his bed, next to the incapacitated Alma, he withered away until the great director in the sky shouted, "Cut!" and Hitchcock's life story ended on April the 29th, 1980. Genius is a word that is used far too frequently in this day and age, but it certainly applies to Alfred Hitchcock. His films have stood the test of time through audience appreciation and critical evaluation. He was the ultimate British knight in shining armour of the movies, always ready to gallop into battle on his celluloid horse across a drawbridge made of film reels. Sir Alfred Hitchcock was certainly best known as the master of suspense, but this was only possible because first and foremost he was Sir Alfred Hitchcock, master filmmaker extraordinaire.